The dimly lit parking lot was silent except for the soft shuffle of footsteps. An elderly man, wearing a worn leather jacket, unloaded groceries from his car, unaware of the shadows moving toward him. The thugs, confident and smug, saw only an easy target, a frail cargo pilot past his prime. But this wasn't just any pilot. Decades ago, he led one of the most daring C-130 missions in history, flying straight into hostile territory under fire to deliver critical supplies. As they closed in, the man glanced up, his eyes sharp and calculating. He didn't flinch, he assessed. The kind of calm only someone who's faced death in the skies can muster. What happened next left the thugs questioning everything they thought they knew about their victim. This is the story of bravery, resilience, and a past that refuses to stay buried. Stay tuned to find out what unfolds. The thugs surrounded the man, their voices low but menacing. They expected fear, maybe even begging. Instead, the old pilot calmly finished unloading his bag, his movements deliberate. "You boys sure about this?" he asked, his tone steady, almost curious. The question hung in the air, unsettling them for just a moment before one of them laughed it off. What they didn't know was that this man had spent decades navigating life-or-death situations, often against impossible odds. His hands, steady now, had gripped the controls of a C-130 as it flew through storms of enemy fire. Every decision he made back then carried the weight of his crew's lives. He wasn't just a pilot, he was a survivor, a strategist, someone who'd seen the worst humanity had to offer and lived to tell the tale. The leader of the group stepped closer, but the pilot's sharp gaze didn't waver. Something was about to happen. The leader of the group smirked, stepping closer, trying to assert dominance. "You don't look so tough, old man," he sneered. The pilot didn't respond right away, his eyes briefly scanning the group. He wasn't looking for an escape, he was calculating, sizing up the situation just like he had so many times in the past. "I seem tougher," the pilot finally said, his voice calm, but with an edge that made the smirk falter. For a brief moment, the memory of that fateful mission flickered in his mind. Flying a C-130 loaded with critical supplies through hostile airspace wasn't just dangerous, it was almost suicidal. His plane had been riddled with bullets, fuel leaking, engines straining, and yet he'd found a way to complete the mission. He'd faced chaos and survived. The thugs, still clueless about the man they'd targeted, began to argue amongst themselves about their next move. But the pilot didn't let his guard down. He could sense the tension between them, an opening, if needed. Every muscle in his body was prepared, every instinct from his years in the skies sharper than ever. The group underestimated him, but they wouldn't for long. The leader of the group clenched his fists, annoyed by the pilot's calm demeanor. "You think this is a game?" he growled, stepping closer. The other thugs shifted uneasily, their earlier confidence starting to waver. Something about the old man wasn't adding up. Why wasn't he scared? Why wasn't he trying to run or plead? The pilot took a step back, not in retreat, but to position himself. His eyes remained steady, locked on the leader. "You boys have no idea what you're getting into," he said evenly. There was no threat in his tone, just a quiet certainty that made the words hit harder. Years of survival instincts were kicking in now. He remembered the times his plane had been surrounded, how he'd made split-second decisions to save lives. He wasn't just thinking about himself in this moment, he was preparing for whatever might come next. The tension in the air was thick, the group's bravado unraveling as they exchanged nervous glances. One of the younger members hesitated, his hand twitching as if reaching for something. The pilot saw it immediately, his mind calculating possibilities, just as he had when enemy fire streaked across his windshield years ago. The scene was poised to explode, and the next move could change everything. The younger thug finally pulled out a knife, its blade glinting under the dim streetlight. The leader smirked, thinking the sight of a weapon would finally break the old man's composure. But instead of fear, the pilot's expression shifted, just slightly, into something that resembled disappointment. "A knife," he said quietly, shaking his head. "You're playing with tools you don't even know how to use." The leader barked a laugh, but it was hollow. "You talk too much," he snapped. "Let's see if you're still running your mouth after this." He motioned for the others to close in. But before they could take another step, the sound of tires screeching nearby broke the tension. A black SUV pulled into the lot, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The thugs froze, unsure of what was happening. The pilot's face remained unreadable, but his posture shifted ever so slightly, as if he had expected this. The vehicle door opened, and a figure stepped out, broad-shouldered, dressed in tactical gear. The thugs exchanged panicked whispers, realizing too late that the man they'd targeted wasn't alone. The leader of the group took a step back, his confidence cracking. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice faltering. The pilot didn't answer. He simply stood there, calm as ever, watching the pieces fall into place. Whatever was about to happen, it was clear the thugs were now in way over their heads. The tension was electric as the figure from the SUV approached, his boots crunching on the pavement. The thugs exchanged frantic glances, their earlier bravado replaced by fear. "Who are you?" the leader barked, his voice trembling now. The man in tactical gear didn't answer. Instead, he nodded at the pilot, who gave a slight, knowing smile. "You really should have picked someone else," the pilot said, his voice calm but firm. "Because now you've got two choices: leave quietly or learn the hard way." The leader hesitated, his grip tightening on the knife. But before he could decide, the man from the SUV spoke, his voice deep and commanding. "I'd listen to him if I were you. You're outnumbered, outmatched, and officially out of time." The thugs began to retreat, muttering excuses, but the pilot held up a hand. "Not so fast," he said. "Empty your pockets, phones, wallets, leave it all behind." Reluctantly, they complied, tossing their belongings to the ground before disappearing into the night. As the last thug vanished, the man in tactical gear approached the pilot. "You always did know how to handle a situation, didn't you, Colonel?" he said with a grin. The pilot chuckled softly, bending to pick up the discarded knife. "Old habits die hard." He glanced at his ally. "You got here just in time, though." The twist came as the pilot handed the knife to his friend. "Add this to the collection," he said. "You never know when we might need it again." The two exchanged a look, a silent acknowledgement of their shared past, before walking back to the SUV, leaving the parking lot silent once more. As the SUV rolled out of the parking lot, the pilot leaned back in his seat, watching the quiet streets pass by. His ally glanced over, breaking the silence. "You never told me why you were out there alone tonight." The pilot smiled faintly. "I wasn't alone. I knew you'd show up." It was the kind of trust built over years of surviving impossible missions together. The danger tonight had been different, smaller in scale, but the stakes had felt just as high. Back home, the pilot placed the knife on a shelf next to other reminders of battles fought and won, small tokens of survival that told a bigger story. He looked at the clock, thinking about how life had changed since those days in the cockpit of a C-130. Tonight wasn't just a reminder of his past, but proof that some skills and some instincts never fade.